Hi, I'm Dolly Vasta, and welcome back once again to Dolly's World. Behind me is the Raritan River. Now, how many times have you passed by the Raritan River or gone over the Raritan River? Have you ever given it a second thought, except maybe to say, oh, look how crystal clear the water is, or look at the sun glistening on the water? Well, the Raritan River holds many secrets, and it has a great deal of history and charm. And it's the history that has always fascinated me about water. So I decided that we would do a show today on the past, the present, and the future of the Raritan River. I have some guests today who are exceedingly knowledgeable about the lore, the history, and the restoration of the Raritan River. So I'd like you to meet Freeholder Director David B. Crabiel and Anna Ashkenas, who is Director of the Middlesex County Cultural and Heritage Commission. Dave, you've been in the area as long as I have, much longer actually, and you've seen so many things change. And way back, I guess it was early 60s, early 70s, the river took a whole different look. It really became unsightly, and as one writer wrote, a cesspool, which is not too glamorous to live near a cesspool. And I guess you decided to do something about this and restore the Raritan to what it actually had been.
Well, I first got the idea as a county freeholder. We went to Baltimore for a conference, and the Baltimore harbor is just beautiful. They've reclaimed that entire harbor, and I came back enthused. Why couldn't the Raritan River be the same way? And so we put a great emphasis on reclaiming the Raritan River as it was a couple hundred years ago. And I believe in another 3 years we're going to be very successful. We've already started on the land down in Lawrence Harbor with a park in Old Bridge and coming up to the South Amboy waterfront. And then, of course, the National Lead Land, we're committed to clean up that parcel as well. And then right up into the city of New Brunswick. And if you start on the other side, the Arthur Kill, Carteret is starting to move with some improvements on the waterfront, the Woodbridge, and then Perth Amboy. You have to give Mayor Vass a tremendous amount of credit because Perth Amboy shore is really all cleaned up now.
Yes, it's
and
beautiful.
Coming up to Edison and Highland Park, where we're reclaiming Donaldson Park at the present time. So we envision in a 3-year period that it's really a great progress, and Raritan River will be a prime spot in the east.
Well, tell me a little bit about the actual proposal that you have put forth on the river.
We retained through the Improvement Authority, although it was funded by the county, Board of Chosen Freeholders. I'm the liaison to the Improvement Authority, and we retained an engineering firm, HDR, out of New York State, and they came in with a plan which is a strategy plan, which is quite detailed, and we're following that plan now. And this fall, we hope to gain permits from the DEP of the state of New Jersey that will allow us to dredge for recreational boating, not for commercial boating, but for recreational boating, right up in the vicinity of the Albany Street Bridge in the city of New Brunswick, the county seat. And when that happens, then you'll be able to have recreational boating right from Sandy Hook coming up to the 20 good restaurants in downtown New Brunswick.
Well, you know, you make it sound so simple, but it really is not. And I know you must have hit upon some snags.
Well, one of the snags that we did hit, we had intended down in the vicinity of the National Lead Land in Saraville to do some dredging there, and some of those who are very much concerned about the environment, they opposed it, and so we pulled that out because we can get up the river without going by right close to the National Lead Land. So there were snags, and there still are. We have to get approval from the state of New Jersey. We think we're going to get it this fall because of spawning of fish. You cannot dredge in the spring, so that means if we can't dredge this fall, and we're hopeful still that we can, then we would have to do it next fall in 1985.
Well, so far, your efforts have been tremendous, and I know a lot of them have been due to the Middlesex County Sewerage Authority.
Well, there's no doubt that the Utilities Authority, and I'm proud of it because I served as a commissioner on the Utilities Authority some years ago, but we kid about it. But really, the effluent that comes out of the Sewage Authority is, we say, is clean enough to drink. It's coming out in a very clean fashion. And so the MCUA, the Utilities Authority, certainly was the first one to do something about the Raritan, and I commend the leadership of the Utilities Authority for what they have done.
But you know what? You also got to realize the importance of the Board of Freeholders, because there are how many towns that make up the riverfront?
That's true, it winds.
And it means that the freeholders had to get agreement from all of the towns, that they all had to work in concert. I mean, that's amazing in this day and age. And over the years, with changes in administration in the different towns, I mean, that's pretty extraordinary.
Do you find, now that you brought it up, Anna, that you had problems, partisan problems, or was it pretty much everyone wanted the river cleaned up?
No, there was a general idea to clean up the river, but there have been many problems, and one of the problems, of course, is financial. To do the dredging that will allow 10 to 12 feet depth so that recreational boating can all come up the Raritan is $7.5 million. Now, we have a commitment from the state that they will give us back half of that, but we have to provide the $7.5 million, and we will, out of the Open Space Fund of the county.
Well, what I think is wonderful, besides just the boating, but I have always been an environmentalist, and the birds and the fish that have come back, and just the keen enjoyment of fishing to so many, all kinds of fish. I was amazed, you know, things like fluke and bass and things like, you know, fish such as these, which had been gone from this area for a long time.
I notice you say you've been an environmentalist. I remember I've sat on the Middlesex County Planning Board for years, and one time a gentleman came and made it critical, made us look like we were not environmentalists, and I said, well, I'm an environmentalist also, because we're all concerned about the environment, and we're trying to do something about it.
Well, you certainly have, and I think you have people too who have been watch guards. There's a gentleman that I read of, Bill Schultz, who pilots a boat and checks everything out and sees that everything is copacetic along the river. And I think that's great that there are people who care that much, away from administrations and the political scene, just everyday people who care.
We're going to put a floating dock in the city of New Brunswick so that you'll be able to bring a boat up, get off, a yacht up or whatever, get off of the floating dock, go over a pedestrian walkway, which will go over Highway 18 and walk to one of the 20 restaurants in downtown New Brunswick at this time. That's what we envision that will take place in the next 3 years.
Well, with the housing that has sprung up along the river there, those condominiums are beautiful. And to be able to give them a really great view of the river and what is going on would increase the value of the property twice, it seems to me anyway.
One of our biggest problems that we still haven't figured out how to do it, but on the shore of East Brunswick, down off Edgeboro Road, there's an old boat that's been sitting there for years.
George
it's dilapidated, and it's in terrible condition, and nobody knows how to get rid of it. But somehow we're going to get lucky and get rid of that old boat, because it certainly destroys the beauty of that shore in East Brunswick Township.
Well, you know, George Cyril is an old friend of mine.
He's a friend of mine, too.
A friend of yours, too, I know. And I know his great dream had been to turn that into a floating restaurant at one time. Yeah, too late now. Yes, I'm sure George, excuse me, knows it.
Yeah.
But it would have been a great idea. So what else do you see? This floating dock and ships coming up, you know, pleasure craft rather.
Well, the beauty is, and a year ago, I took a ride on a boat up the entire Raritan and the Arthur Kill, and there are parts that are just beautiful. I mentioned before Perth Amboy, Lawrence Harbor, shoreline, the South Amboy shoreline, and then there are some areas that aren't so beautiful. And our hope is in a 3-year period we get those tidied up so that when you travel up the Arthur Kill into the Raritan or from Sandy Hook coming up the Monmouth County line and come up the Raritan, that the shoreline is just beautiful. I want to say this, the county landfill, used to be Edgeboro landfill, really from the shore looks good.
Yeah, well, it's green.
So that's been cleaned up to a large extent.
And you know, Freehold has been talking about pleasure boat travel, but in truth, all of the rehabilitation of the river also is friendly to just people who are walking and families, and there's parks that
biking.
It doesn't mean that you have to be one of the few people,
Right.
you know, the lucky ones.
You don't have to go out and buy a yacht, is what you're saying.
Exactly, that it's been reclaimed for, you know, families and foot traffic and bikers, and, you know, so that it's really a very friendly place to be along the river.
Dolly, our county, which is the 3rd largest in the state of New Jersey now, almost 800,000 people strong. The Crown of England decreed it in 1683. So we go back to 1683.
Yes.
Anna, the river goes back before that. Just where was the significance?
Well, the river,
historically of the river?
You're absolutely right. Before the settlers from the English and the Dutch, the river was actually life-giving to the native people that lived along the river, and they would purposefully make their homes along the river because before Western Europeans brought horses here, the Lenape, who are the native people, didn't have horses, so they either traveled on foot or they traveled on the river. At that time, they used to have a diet that was mostly seafood taken from the river. The oysters used to be as big as 8 inches, so that one oyster would be a whole meal. The canoes that they used to travel on the river were taken from the trees that lined the river, and at that time they didn't have metal axes, and they used to put mud on around the base of the tree and then set a fire, and the fire would then just burn the very bottom of the tree, and when it was like just about half burned through, then they would take their axe and chop the rest of the tree down and then hollow it out for the canoe.
The Cornelius Lau House is the county museum.
Yes, sir.
Didn't Cornelius Lau have something to do with the river?
Yes, after the native people, the first major settlement was Raritan Landing, which is now what we call Piscataway, and Cornelius Lau, whose home, you know, the county owns, was a very wealthy merchant that helped to create this town. He would bring in ships from as far away as Europe and Africa, because the river at that time was 30 feet deep, and a seafaring vessel could come all the way up to Piscataway or the New Brunswick area. And he was able to have his house on the bluff and look down on the river and see this bustling community of Raritan Landing and the storehouses of all of the goods that would come in, and that was everything from China and foodstuffs and materials for making barrels and all kinds of things.
And now we have a golf course in Piscataway, a county golf course
We sure
that
do.
got its name out of
Yes.
Raritan Landing.
Yes, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
you know, too, getting on with the history of New Brunswick, it's interesting how much old history. It goes back to the Revolution.
Oh, sure,
Route 18
right,
was an Indian trail.
right. Well, it goes back to the Revolution because it's also a high point. It was very strategic in the Revolutionary War. The British and the Patriots fought over control of the river, not only because they wanted to resupply their troops, and it was the furthest inland that a ship could come, but it also has very high points where they could see any incoming troops or any maneuvers of troops, and so both sides fought for the river. Washington, at one point when he was retreating, actually burned the only bridge that was crossing the river and sunk 5 British vessels in order to halt the British following him, and actually gained 5 days by doing that. On the other hand, when in about 1778 along the river, Washington and his troops were camped, and Washington made some of his very famous addresses to the troops right on the shores of the Raritan.
In 1772, the Landing Lane Bridge. Now, I'm sure people out there remember the old Landing Lane Bridge. It connected River Road with eventually Easton Avenue, but it came up on the end of Route 18.
Well, it's interesting because we're sitting here with a freeholder director. Counties, one of their major responsibilities when they were first formed was bridges, and to build bridges and maintain them. And there was a footbridge that went over the Raritan that the county was able to charge tolls to the people and the horses, and if you were a single person or you were a family, there were different rates. If you were pulling a cart, you know, there was another rate.
A man with a wheelbarrow.
Yes, a man.
That was the most expensive, was the man with the wheelbarrow, believe it.
Yes, yes.
I thought that
You
was so
mentioned the
funny.
Revolutionary War, but this all most of this predates the
Yes.
Revolutionary
Yes,
War. So
yes.
Yeah.
the historical significance is
Right.
tremendous.
But then, you know, you really need to even bring it to more modern times, because World War I and World War II, that the river was very important. The businesses or the companies that grew up along the river, because they needed the river for water, they needed the river for, you know, a number of reasons to run the corporations, that Middlesex County had was the largest munitions manufacturer during World War I.
Raritan Arsenal.
Exactly. The Raritan Arsenal defensive.
Which is now the county college.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And then there was Camp Kilmer.
At Camp Kilmer.
When
Camp
we first
Kilmer.
came there, it was flooded with soldiers, and New Brunswick was the most thriving,
Right.
busy town.
Right, Camp
I
Kilmer
have
played a
ever seen.
major role in training troops just before they went off
Right.
to fight. Even companies like Johnson & Johnson that chose to create their headquarters along the river, it was because in the early days they used the river for transport and for their manufacturing. And we all know that the role that J&J has played in technology and also during the major world wars. Cornelius Vanderbilt, which is now, you're going into the 19th century, the late 1800s, that's a name that everybody knows. The Vanderbilts were among the wealthiest people in the entire world. Cornelius Vanderbilt, his first ship, which grew into, you know, a major shipping industry, was a steamboat on the Raritan River that he was able to pay for because his wife owned a hotel in New Brunswick, and he got the money from her for this crazy technology called, you know, steamships. But he bought his first ship, and we all know what happened, you know, with Industrial Revolution and Cornelius Vanderbilt. So the river has been on the forefront of the, or has really been a harbinger of what has been happening throughout the United States, but it always seemed to happen first in Middlesex County and certainly on the river.
And of course, we cannot forget the tributary, the South River,
Right.
that runs right through South River, that was noted for its rum runners between 1920 and 1933.
Yes.
And they used to make it. A
Well,
lot of it in South River.
You can't say Middlesex County people weren't clever.
Yes, that's true. And some of them own these huge homes going up into Sayreville in Morgan. And it's funny because I called my brother, for years, my grandfather was a doctor in Morgan, and we always summered down there, right on the Raritan. And my brother is older than I am, so he remembered, he was about 8 at that time, and they used to get down during the daytime, and they'd make a nickel or a dime cleaning the boats. Mm-hmm. And he said one night, our dad called him to the window, and it blew up. One of them blew up. The vessels carrying all the booze.
Yeah.
And he said booze went all over, and he said all the residents were out swimming the bay, reconnoitering. And he said it's something that was in his memory, and it was buried there. And when I mentioned it to him on the phone, he said to me, "Oh, I remember one of those." Yeah. So you see, we're just famous for everything.
Even in Prohibition.
Even in Prohibition, we kept them going.
Right, right.
But it's fascinating, all these little pieces, when they all come together, what they make.
Right. And now what the plan is really to give the contemporary society in Middlesex County a new history with the river. To now make it a place that's recreational and enjoyment, and really kind of let the river reclaim its importance to all the towns and all the people.
The big fight a few years ago was that there were some who wanted to make for commercial boating, to bring up barges and so forth into Edison Township, and I argued hopefully effectively against that what we needed was recreational boating and not to commercialize it. And I think that's the idea to do commercial is not going to happen now, somewhat because of the high cost of dredging the Raritan to let big vessels come up the Raritan.
Right, right.
Well, even the South Seaboard in New York they did such a great job on that, and that was kind of a starter, I think, for so many places around. I have been to Baltimore after they did all the restoration, and I'll tell you, that is gorgeous down there. But I honestly believe that the Raritan will probably surpass it. Anyway, listen, in the last few minutes that we have to sum the show up, I can't believe it's gone so fast. I always ask my guests, if they had their druthers, what would they want to see in the future, the very future, that they can leave as a legacy in the area they're interested in? And with you, right at the moment, it's the river. What is your...
Well, my term of office is up at the end of 2005, and whether I seek office again, that's to be determined at a later date. But my dream is by the end of 2005 that we have real, genuine progress on the cleanup of the Raritan. And if we do, then within a 3 to 4 year period, the Raritan is going to be a beauty spot in the eastern part of this country.
And it's a great legacy to have been connected with it in such a way. And you, Anna?
The freeholders have already given the people of Middlesex County 2 cultural legacies. One is the East Jersey Old Town Village, and the other is the Cornelius Lau House. So in terms of what I do for the people of Middlesex County, I think I'd like to see in terms of the river that people begin to use it as a teaching environment, so that we now tell the history of the people and the communities, but we tell the history of the river, because it's so very important. And that, I think, I would like to see, that the schools now use the river as a resource for educational purposes. And I guess ecology education too, because that's a wonderful example of what can be done in terms of ecology and bringing it back, saving our planet, you know.
And seeing more tours of it
And seeing,
that,
yeah.
that are given to the
Right.
school kids.
Right.
It would be absolutely fascinating.
Right.
You know, and they would be so fascinated by it. I think kids are extremely taken
Right.
with the ocean and its life, and the rivers and the life that goes on
The
beneath it.
cornucopia boat that's moored down in Perth Amboy will be able to come up to New Brunswick.
Oh my goodness.
And I think
that's
that's
wonderful.
a different approach.
That would be
that
exciting.
people
Oh,
will
that
be able
is
to see.
exciting.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
It'll be almost like a sightseeing boat.
yes.
Would
Yeah,
be
very
ju-
much.
Just great. Well, listen, our time really has run out, and but I wanted to thank the two of you for coming in. It's such a dreary morning, but this has been such a cheerful spot to be, and to sit and talk about not only the past, but what the future will be, what the present is now leading into the future. I think it's something to look forward to, and all these young families that are coming into town and into the area have so much to look forward to.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
So thank you both.
And remember, Middlesex County is the greatest county in the land.
Oh boy, that's propaganda if I've ever heard it. Well, that's about it. Remember, the Egyptians had their pyramids, the Greeks had their Parthenon, and we in New Jersey have the Raritan River, which flows into the Raritan Bay and on into the mighty Atlantic Ocean. I want to thank everyone who helped me with the show today, Jane Leal, Claudia Link, and one other small thing. This is the beginning of our 23rd year. So my thanks to my entire crew, and especially to my director, Dave Ambrosi. Take care, all of you, and I'll see you next month.